Hello, and welcome to the Spicy Pod Sleep Stories. I am Michael, and tonight we step into the glittering halls of a palace where secrets simmer and desire lingers just out of reach. We follow Princess Elena and her stoic guardian Noah as a staged romance sparks, with teasing glances, stolen touches, and moments that blur the line between pretense and truth. Behind closed doors, behind careful smiles, a slow burning connection ignites. Soft kisses, lingering hands, and quiet, irresistible tension that neither duty nor decorum can contain. Witness a love that begins as a lie and becomes something far more real. Noah had always moved through the palace like a shadow, silent, watchful, every step precise, every glance measured. As the head of royal security, he knew the patterns of every corridor, the hidden angles of every hall, and the subtle rhythms of palace life. But today, his attention was fixed not on threats or intruders, but on the most unpredictable variable in the kingdom, Princess Elena. Elena had grown up accustomed to duty and expectation, yet there was an untamed spark in her, one that resisted the strictures of palace life. Strong-willed and private, she moved with a grace that made even seasoned courtiers pause, a quiet confidence that rarely needed affirmation. But lately, even she could not ignore the mounting scandals in the press, the whispers of personal missteps, the persistent rumors threatening her reputation. The palace PR team had a solution, one that made her eyebrows rise in reluctant amusement, a fabricated romance between herself and the unflappable security officer. At first she had protested. Noah, too disciplined, too serious, too untouchable, could not possibly play along in a charade of courtly affection. And yet, duty often demanded concessions that defied personal preference. So here she was, standing in the private wing, waiting for the man who had always been a guardian at a distance and now tasked with becoming a partner of illusion. Are you ready for this exercise? Noah's voice was quiet, but there was a subtle weight to it, the kind that made her heart rate quicken even before she understood why. Elena forced a small smile, as ready as I'll ever be. They began with the simplest movements first, a hand on an elbow, a brief brush of fingers, the faintest leaning into one another for balance as they moved down the corridor. Every touch was deliberate, every glance calibrated for the illusion of intimacy. And yet, in the soft glow of the sconces lining the walls, their eyes lingered a fraction longer than necessary, and the air between them hummed with something unspoken. A stumble, carefully staged, brought them closer, and Noah's hand hovered at the small of her back before retreating, as if he had forgotten the rules for only a heartbeat. Elena's breath caught, and she blamed it on the awkwardness of the exercise. "You have a way of looking like you're about to solve a mystery," she murmured, almost to herself, teasing. "Even when you're just practicing." Noah's lips twitched in a ghost of a smile, and she noticed how it softened the rigidity of his jaw. "I solve mysteries quietly," he said, voice low, measured, even pretend ones. There was a pause. In that small space, with the echoes of their own footsteps and the distant hum of the palace beyond, the pretense began to blur. A shared joke, a lingering glance, the accidental warmth of a hand brushing hers. Each moment carved a new rhythm between them, subtle yet undeniable. When the exercise ended and they stepped apart, both of them carried a private awareness, a quiet recognition that the rules had shifted. Elena's lips curved into a small, almost mischievous smile, and Noah's eyes, dark and steady, seemed to linger a fraction longer than protocol allowed. And so, the assignment had begun, not with scandal or spectacle, but with a simple, fragile tension that neither of them could entirely name. Yet both would come to feel in the days that followed. The palace gardens were quiet at night, bathed in silver light from a nearly full moon. The hedges cast soft shadows across the cobblestone paths, and the fragrance of jasmine and roses drifted through the cool air. It was a world apart from the constant scrutiny of palace life, a world that felt private, almost forbidden. Elena walked slowly, her skirts brushing the stones, every step careful but unconsciously graceful. Noah kept pace beside her, silent and attentive. Ta, he rhythmic sound of his boots grounding her in a strange sense of safety. Despite the night's calm, there was tension, a hum of anticipation that neither of them could ignore. "You know," Elena said, her voice carrying lightly over the breeze, "if anyone saw us now, they'd assume we were conspiring something scandalous." She allowed a small smirk to tug at her lips. Noah's dark eyes followed her, calm but alert. "Let them assume what they will," he murmured. "We're only walking." There was a pause, a subtle pause, heavy with unspoken words, and then their hands brushed, an almost accidental touch as they passed through a narrow archway framed with wisteria. Elena's fingers tingled, her pulse skipping a beat as she felt the warmth of his palm. He didn't pull away either, their hands lingering just long enough to spark a shared awareness neither wanted to name aloud. Elena drew in a breath. "You're unusually steady," she said softly, teasing but not fully masking the flutter in her chest. Even in situations that should feel awkward, Noah's lips quirked in a ghost of a smile. "Experience," he said quietly, "and patience." The moonlight glinted off his features, softening the hardness that often made him seem untouchable. Elena found herself studying the lines of his face, the intensity of his gaze, and the subtle way his hand lingered near hers despite their pretense. They moved further into the gardens, past fountains whose gentle splashes echoed faintly in the night, past neatly trimmed hedges that seemed to guide them toward a secluded bench tucked beneath a flowering arbor. It was here, away from the eyes of the court and the press, that their connection deepened in ways neither had anticipated. Seated side by side, their shoulders almost touching, they began to share small observations. Elena's dry humor cutting through the quiet, Noah's quiet intensity offering calm in return. She laughed softly at one of his rare, understated jokes, and he allowed himself a smile that was warmer than the moonlight surrounding them. A breeze stirred, carrying the scent of night-blooming flowers, and their hands brushed again. Closer this time. Elena's heartbeat quickened, the proximity making her painfully aware of the thrum between them. She wanted to pull back, to remind herself this was pretense. Yet the magnetic draw of Noah's presence kept her rooted. I suppose this is part of the assignment, Elena whispered, half to herself. Learning each other's quirks, pretending to care, until the press is satisfied. Noah's gaze met hers, steady and deep. Perhaps we're learning more than the press anticipates, he said, voice low and deliberate. The words hung between them, charged, and Elena felt a shiver of anticipation. They rose together, walking slowly back toward the palace. Each step was measured, each glance deliberate, yet each brush of fingers, each accidental touch carried the weight of something far more potent than duty. Outside observers would see only two palace figures strolling beneath the moon. Inside, both knew the truth. The pretense was shifting, subtly, dangerously, towards something real. And so, the night concluded with a quiet promise. Neither spoke aloud. A recognition that even in a fabricated romance, desire and curiosity could not be fully contained. The gardens, bathed in silver and shadow, held the memory of that first delicate touch, a beginning that would pull them closer in ways neither expected. The dinner was meant to be a carefully choreographed display of courtly grace, the kind that dazzled the press while keeping the palace scandal-free. Elena had taken her seat at the ornate table, the candles casting soft, flickering light over her features, and Noah had stationed himself nearby, vigilant yet unobtrusive. Everything went according to plan until an overzealous journalist, notebook poised, stepped a little too close, his intrusive questions cutting through the delicate formality of the evening. Noah's instincts took over. In one swift movement, he stepped to Elena's side, his hand lightly on her elbow as he guided her just enough to create distance. "Your Grace, may I?" the journalist began, but Noah's quiet authority ended the intrusion before it could escalate. His gaze met Elena's, calm, protective, unflinching, and she felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the candlelight. Later, the press gone and the palace corridors emptied, Elena found herself walking beside Noah in the soft hush of the servants' quarters. The pretense of the stage romance had never felt so fragile, so real. You always know exactly what to do. Elena said softly, her voice a mixture of amusement and something unspoken. Noah's lips curved in a near smile, just a flicker of expression. "It's my job," he murmured, but the slight softness in his tone betrayed more than professional pride. They paused in a quiet corner, the shadows wrapping around them like a protective cloak. Elena's hand brushed against his, almost by accident, and he didn't pull away. Instead, his fingers lightly grazed hers, a subtle acknowledgement of closeness that left her breath a little unsteady. The space between them contracted naturally without thought or plan, until their shoulders touched. Elena's pulse raced. She wanted to remind herself this was all pretense, that nothing of what they felt could be real. Yet the heat in her chest and the pull of his gaze defied reason. And then it happened. An unspoken, fleeting moment where proximity became impossibility. Noah leaned just slightly closer, enough that their breaths mingled, and for a heartbeat, the world narrowed to the warmth of him, the subtle tension in the air, the quiet brush of lips hovering in hesitation. Elena's eyes closed softly, sensing the tentative, almost reverent nature of the touch. It lingered just long enough to imprint itself, tender and electric, before they both stepped back, breathless, aware of the boundary they had crossed without meaning to. Her hand lingered near his, fingers brushing once more, as if to memorize the feeling. "That wasn't entirely part of the plan," she said, voice barely above a whisper, cheeks warmed. "No," Noah admitted, his voice low and steady, though his eyes held something unspoken. "Plans rarely account for honesty." For a long moment they simply stood there, the press and palace obligations forgotten, suspended in the shared understanding of a connection neither fully named. Elena's heart still raced, and Noah's usually controlled composure carried a subtle shift, softened, attentive, aware. Walking back to her chambers side by side, each accidental touch, each lingering glance, carried the memory of that first kiss, delicate and charged. They both sensed it, the spark that had been there from the beginning, now undeniable, quietly insisting that pretense was no longer enough. By the time Elena reached her door, she realized that the line between staged affection and real desire had blurred irrevocably, and Noah, ever silent, ever watchful, had moved closer than ever to her heart without uttering a single word. The palace walls had a way of holding secrets, and behind closed doors, the rules of duty often softened into moments of quiet intimacy. For Elena and Noah, what began as pretense was becoming something richer, something neither of them had anticipated. It started with small gestures, a shared laugh over a missed step in the grand hall, a hand lingering near an elbow, brushing accidentally, or so it seemed, against the others. The palace corridors, once just routes from one obligation to the next, had become a stage for subtle games of proximity and quiet amusement. Careful, Elena whispered one evening as they walked past a tapestry-lined hall, or someone might catch us practicing again. Noah's eyes, dark and watchful, met hers. "I don't think anyone would mind," he murmured, his tone low enough that it carried only for her. The faintest curve of a smile softened the hardness she'd always admired, and until recently kept her at a careful distance. They found themselves drawn to the secluded wings of the palace, where light was softer and the air smelled faintly of polished wood and distant roses. Here in the quiet, their pretense felt almost secondary to the undercurrent of curiosity and desire. A whispered joke became a shared smile, a playful nudge along the shoulder became a lingering brush that left her pulse uneven. One evening, Noah suggested a practice dance, a way to perfect the appearance of intimacy for the public. Elena raised an eyebrow, teasing, but consented. Hands clasped, they moved slowly across the empty ballroom, the echo of their steps mingling with the soft hum of the chandeliers above. "You lead," she said, half in jest, half with a thrill she did not quite understand. "No, I think you should," he replied, surprising her with the gentleness in his voice. Their movements were careful, measured, yet in the quiet of the ballroom, carefulness gave way to something more instinctive. Fingers brushed, hands lingered, and the brush of his palm at her back sent a warmth curling through her chest. Elena found herself laughing softly at the absurdity of it, though the sound held an undercurrent of shyness, and Noah's smile deepened in response, low and quiet, but undeniably tender. The teasing continued in private corridors and hidden alcoves. Elena would make a playful remark, and Noah's stoic composure would falter just enough for her to notice, revealing glimpses of the man beneath the uniform discipline. In return, he learned the cadence of her humor, the way her eyes danced with mischief, even as she tried to mask it. One night, seated near a fountain in a private courtyard, Elena dared to speak of something she had never shared with anyone, an insecurity that usually stayed tightly locked away. The words were tentative, barely audible over the gentle ripple of water. Noah listened without interruption, his presence steady and grounding. When she finished, he didn't offer a lecture or a solution, but leaned just enough closer to brush a strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering with gentle intimacy. The touch was simple, yet it held a quiet reassurance, a promise without words. Elena felt the tension in her chest ease slightly, replaced by an unexpected warmth that had nothing to do with the night air. In his gaze, she recognized patience, understanding, and something more, something that reached past the pretense and into something undeniably real. As the weeks passed, the palace became a labyrinth of secret touches and quiet moments. A hand resting for a heartbeat longer than necessary, fingers brushing while retrieving a glass of water, a whispered comment that carried a laugh or a shiver. Each moment was small, seemingly inconsequential, yet each carved a new rhythm between them. By the time they parted for the evening, both carried an awareness of a connection that was no longer entirely pretend. Their eyes lingered a fraction longer than politeness required, and when she finally stepped into her chambers, she felt a slow, deliberate warmth bloom across her skin, a mixture of curiosity, desire, and the undeniable pull of Noah's quiet intensity. Behind closed doors, the rules of the palace no longer applied, and pretense had become something fragile and sweet, almost impossible to separate from reality. Each touch, each glance, each softly spoken word brought them closer, not just in appearance, but in the subtle intimacy of trust, teasing, and the kind of desire that sleeps lightly beneath the surface, waiting to be acknowledged. The palace had never felt smaller than it did that morning. Elena moved through the corridors with practiced grace, but her thoughts were anything but composed. A visiting dignitary's son, a young noble with an easy smile and persistent charm, had arrived at the palace, his attention immediately drawn to her. Noah, ever vigilant, noticed the subtle shift before she even spoke. The way the young man lingered a little too long during introductions, the way he tilted his head when laughing, the casual confidence that masked a sharp ambition. It was enough to ignite something protective in Noah. "You seem distracted," he murmured quietly, walking beside her in a hallway lined with marble columns. Elena's lips curved in a wry smile. "I'm perfectly composed. It's external distractions, nothing more." Noah's eyes, dark and unwavering, didn't leave hers. External distractions sometimes require intervention. Their steps slowed as they entered a secluded gallery, paintings of ancestors watching from gilded frames. Elena felt a thrill at his presence, the quiet heat that radiated from him, the way he always seemed to stand close enough to matter but not so close as to overwhelm. Later that evening, the supposed pretense of their romance took on a new urgency. During a garden reception, the young noble lingered too near, offering compliments with a confidence that bordered on flirtation. Noah subtly positioned himself between them, his presence a quiet shield. Elena's pulse quickened, not from fear, but from the undeniable intensity of his attention. "Seems your charm has admirers," she whispered, when the young man finally moved away, though her voice betrayed the tiniest trace of fluster. Noah's response was low, near her ear, as they walked back toward the palace wing. "I tend to be vigilant." His hand brushed hers in passing, deliberate, grounding, and her pulse stuttered. The warmth of him lingered, a quiet assertion of possession. that made her cheeks rise in a shade she hoped he noticed. The tension that had been simmering for weeks began to surface in small, combustible moments. A playful disagreement over the placement of chairs in the sitting room escalated into a teasing confrontation. Fingers brushed, elbows collided, and what began as a jesting argument left them standing closer than etiquette allowed, both aware of the charged electricity in the air. A near kiss, almost accidental, hovered on the edge of possibility. Elena's lips parted slightly, a breath caught in her chest, as Noah leaned just enough toward her for the space between them to contract. But the moment was interrupted by the rustle of a servant outside the door, and they stepped apart with quiet, suppressed laughter. The tension didn't dissipate, it only simmered, leaving behind a delicious anticipation that neither wanted to name. In the quiet that followed, Elena realized that the pretense of their romance was no longer enough. Every glance, every brush of fingers, every unspoken word carried meaning beyond the stage narrative. Noah's protective presence, his subtle attentions, had begun to mean something more, and she found herself secretly pleased by it, even as she fought against admitting it. "You are impossible," she said softly as they finally returned to her chambers, a teasing lilt in her voice, though her heart still raced. "No," Noah corrected gently, his voice low, the faintest warmth brushing her ear. "I'm necessary." Elena's cheeks flushed, and for the first time, she let herself consider the truth lurking beneath their stage gestures. The palace gossip, the noble admirers, the press, they all faded into the background as her awareness of Noah sharpened. He was no longer just a shadow at the edge of her life. He was present, real, and achingly impossible to ignore. And so, the night closed with a quiet acknowledgement. Pretense was losing its hold. Jealousy had awakened feelings too stubborn to ignore, and the slow burn between them was no longer entirely secret. Each glance, each touch, each carefully measured word was a step closer to something real, something neither could yet name, but both already felt. Rain hammered against the palace windows, drumming a restless rhythm as if echoing the storm building between them. Inside, the corridor smelled of polished wood and faint candle wax, but the air between Elena and Noah felt charged, taut with unspoken words and emotions they had been holding at bay. It began with a disagreement, minor on the surface, but layered with everything they had been feeling. A small miscommunication. Over the evening schedule spiraled, voices low but sharp, hearts beating faster than the falling rain outside. Elena's eyes flashed, her frustration mirrored by Noah's steady, unyielding gaze. "I don't understand why this is so important to you," she said, her voice trembling between irritation and something she hadn't expected, vulnerability. Noah's jaw tightened, the only sign of the conflict within him. "Because I care," he said quietly. The words weighted with an intensity that made her chest tighten. Because I care more than I should, perhaps more than is safe. The tension broke with a gust of wind rattling the window panes. Rain splattered across the stone floors outside, and in the dim light, Elena found herself drawn to him despite the argument. Her frustration melted into awareness, the awareness of how close they were, how every unspoken glance had been building toward this inevitable moment. Noah reached out first, a tentative hand brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. His touch was gentle, searching, familiar and foreign, all at once. Elena's breath caught, her pulse quickening. She leaned into the contact, an instinctive surrender to the warmth radiating from him. The argument had dissolved into silence, replaced by the charged hush of anticipation. Fingers brushed over her wrist, trailing along the line of her arm, and every accidental contact sent sparks of heat rippling through her. She found herself leaning slightly closer, drawn by the gravity of his presence, the way he seemed to command the space around them while leaving room for her to respond or resist. "You are impossible," she whispered, voice low, both in amusement and awe at the intensity that radiated from him. "I'm not impossible," Noah countered, voice deep, deliberate, vibrating with restrained desire. "I'm yours, if you'll let me be." The words lingered, heavy with meaning, and in that quiet, storm-tossed room they moved instinctively closer. Lips brushed, not in haste, but slowly, reverently, tentative yet charged. Elena's eyes fluttered closed, a soft sigh escaping as she felt the warmth of him, the subtle, electric thrill of a connection she had been resisting. The kiss lingered only long enough to imprint itself, a delicate, teasing promise of more to come. Fingers brushed, a hand rested briefly against a shoulder, a silent acknowledgement of trust and desire. When they finally stepped apart, the world seemed to have shifted. Rain pounded the windows, but inside, the storm had settled into a soft, lingering heat that wrapped around them both. Elena's chest still fluttered, and Noah's usually composed expression carried a rare softness, a quiet vulnerability that left her breathless. For the first time, the pretense of their romance felt almost irrelevant. The argument, the teasing, the near misses, all of it had led to this undeniable truth. They were drawn to each other, irresistibly, inescapably, beyond any facade of duty or expectation. They lingered in the hallway, fingers brushing in quiet acknowledgement, sharing soft, stolen glances that said what words could not. Every touch, every sigh, every careful step, closer, whispered of a desire neither could or wanted to deny. By the time the rain slowed to a gentle patter, Elena and Noah had shared something intimate and unspoken, not just a kiss, not just a moment of connection, but a promise suspended between them, a slow burning bond that was no longer entirely staged, a pull toward each other that neither duty nor decorum could contain. And in the quiet aftermath of the storm, as thunder rumbled far off in the distance, understood that the lines between pretense and truth had blurred irrevocably. They had crossed a threshold together, and neither would ever be the same. The palace felt smaller somehow, as if every corridor and hallway were closing in with the weight of scrutiny. Rumors had begun to circulate. What had been carefully staged was now whispered in hushed tones by courtiers and servants alike. The PR plan had been exposed, if only partially, and the kingdom was watching. Elena moved with measured grace, her heart heavy with the knowledge that appearances mattered, that every gesture could be dissected and judged. Yet the presence of Noah beside her brought a quiet steadiness, a reassurance that no rumor or intrusion could shake. He matched her pace, silent and alert, his hand brushing hers ever so subtly as they walked. Each contact, each glance, carried the memory of storms weathered together, arguments softened by laughter, and the first kiss that had left their hearts unsettled in the best way possible. "You've been thinking," Noah said softly, his voice low, not intrusive, but pointed enough that she couldn't ignore him. "I have," Elena admitted, her gaze fixed ahead, "about what we're supposed to be, what we're pretending, and what we actually feel." The words hung between them, heavy with the weight of expectation and desire alike. The world outside their bubble, the whispers, the press, the gossip, seemed distant, almost irrelevant compared to the pull between them. Noah's hand found hers more deliberately this time, intertwining fingers with a gentle confidence that left no doubt about his intent. "Then we make a choice," he murmured, eyes dark and steady. "Do we continue the facade, or do we embrace what's real?" Elena's pulse quickened. The thought of choosing authenticity, of stepping beyond the pretense they had maintained for weeks, was both terrifying and exhilarating. She met his gaze, searching for a sign, a hint of certainty, and found only the steady intensity that had always drawn her in. "I want real," she whispered, the admission barely audible over the hushed palace corridors. "Not the charade, not for the press, not for anyone but us." Noah's lips curved into a rare, genuine smile, the kind that reached his eyes and softened the stoicism that often kept him untouchable. "Then we have it," he said simply. "Even if the world watches, even if it complicates everything else, we have this moment. We have each other." They paused in a quiet alcove, the distant glow of candlelight casting shadows that danced across the walls. Elena's other hand came to rest lightly against his chest. Feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her fingertips, Noah leaned in, a soft, deliberate closeness that neither rushed nor pressured, allowing the intimacy to settle around them naturally. Their foreheads touched first, a gentle acknowledgement of trust, and the quiet triumph of choosing each other. Then fingers intertwined, hands brushing, small smiles shared. The physical contact spoke of a bond that had grown far beyond any stage romance. It was tender, private, and wholly theirs. Elena rested her head lightly against Noah's shoulder, feeling the warmth and strength of him. In that simple gesture, all the fear, all the uncertainty, all the pretense dissolved. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to simply be, to exist in the quiet reality of their connection. Noah's hand rose to brush a strand of hair from her face, lingering just enough to convey more than words ever could. Their eyes met, a shared understanding passing between them. The choice had been made, and the slow burn of desire, trust, and affection had finally found its release. And as they stood together in the hushed stillness of the palace, hands entwined, hearts attuned, both knew that whatever came next, whispers, scrutiny, or scandal, they would face it side by side. For in choosing each other, they had embraced something far greater than duty, appearances, or expectation. They had embraced the truth of their hearts. The palace courtyard shimmered under the morning sun, the banners fluttering in the light breeze as the press and onlookers gathered for the official announcement. Elena stood beside Noah, her posture poised, the practiced grace of royalty, masking the nervous excitement that fluttered beneath her calm exterior. Noah's hand found hers discreetly, fingers curling together in a quiet, private affirmation. He stood close, protective but not imposing, the weight of his presence grounding her amid the sea of cameras and murmurs. Every glance they shared carried a subtle, unspoken understanding. They had chosen this, together. The announcement proceeded smoothly. Words were spoken, smiles exchanged, cameras clicked, but beneath the surface, the reality of their connection radiated in every small gesture. The gentle touch of their hands, the brief intertwining of fingers, the way they leaned toward each other without effort. Elena's heart beat a little faster as she noticed the way Noah's gaze softened when it met hers. The quiet warmth that no press frenzy could diminish. Each carefully measured smile for the crowd belied the private closeness they shared, an intimacy far removed from the eyes of the world. When the formalities concluded and the courtyard slowly emptied, they lingered together under the shade of an ancient oak. Noah's hand remained in hers, fingers tracing gentle, familiar patterns, a tactile reminder that the pretense was gone, replaced by something entirely real. "Seems the world knows now," Elena murmured, voice soft yet tinged with amusement. "No matter," Noah replied, his dark eyes holding hers. "We know the truth. That's what matters." She leaned slightly into him, their shoulders brushing, and he responded by tilting his head just enough to let their foreheads rest together. A quiet sigh escaped her, a mixture of relief and contentment as the tension of pretense and expectation fell away. Then in a moment neither had planned, Noah's lips met hers, soft, lingering, a gentle seal to the bond they had nurtured in secret. It was a kiss that carried warmth, trust, and all the quiet desire that had been building over weeks of stolen glances, whispered words, and shared spaces. Elena felt the subtle electricity of connection, a heartbeat to heartbeat intimacy that needed no words, no explanations, only presence. Pulling back slightly, their foreheads still touching, they shared a small, knowing smile. It was a smile that said everything: relief, desire, certainty. They had faced the pretense, the pressure, the whispers, and emerged on the other side with a bond stronger than either had dared hope. Hand in hand, they walked back into the palace, moving seamlessly through the corridors and sunlight. Their connection is unspoken, yet undeniable. The cameras had captured appearances, but only they truly understood the quiet fire between them, the slow burning intimacy that had grown from shared moments behind closed doors into a love that could withstand scrutiny and scandal alike. And in that gentle shared closeness, they both knew the story was no longer about pretense or appearances. It was about them, together, steady, and undeniably real. I hope you've enjoyed tonight's story. Good night and sweet dreams.